A theater alive.
Charlotte placed her head on Ramsey's shoulder, her foot brushing against his leg. The final seconds of a black and white 40s movie she couldn't name fading to black, and a feeling tearing into her that instead of sitting here in an abandoned theater she should be back with her mom in the hospital, in that wooden chair that pushed against her back, and the monitors whose beep gave her a week-long headache. The credits rolled. She held Ramsey's hand, trying to convince herself she'd earned the night out after a full year consumed with trips to the hospital, microwavable dinners, and conversations telling her friends and teachers that the doctors didn't think her mom would make it. A chandelier hung from the ceiling and lights hung on the walls, and she clenched her teeth, willing the lights to turn on. Beside the screen were two double doors with columns and an archway, carrying the elegance of an older time now consumed by dust and cobwebs and spotted mold. "We should leave," Charlotte said. "They didn't even turn the lights on yet," Ramsey said. "Will the lights turn back on in an abandoned theater?" Charlotte said. "What's the rush anyway?" Ramsey said. "I'm sure your mom is fine." "Don't talk about my family," Charlotte said. "The whole town talks about your family," Ramsey said. "It's not true though." "What they say," Charlotte said. "Don't you understand how famous this place is? Katharine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart and Doris Day sat in these seats, and even Kennedy before he was president. And why do they keep this movie playing if the theater is abandoned? Town superstitions, I guess. Don't mess with Hess Theater." "Been hearing that my whole life," Charlotte said. "Makes sense when the owner throws themselves off the balcony," Ramsey said. She stood up, stretched her legs and stretched her arms and calmed her breathing. A metallic odor lingered in the air. Charlotte told herself they'd be out of this theater and back on the highway soon. She'd tell her mom she'd been at Kate's house studying or Amy's house studying, any lie better than saying she made out with a boy in an abandoned building. "I actually have a confession to make," Ramsey said. "You're a virgin?" Charlotte said. "Number." "Well, yes, but that's not the confession." Holding my breath. "I've never been here before." "You told me you come all the time." I lied. "Why?" "I wanted to see if what they said about this place was true." "That what? That all those people died in a horrific fire? Or that the owner killed himself after the rebuild because he kept on seeing things and no one believed him?" "Both." "I don't think you'd find anything." She stepped over Ramsey, felt him looking at her. A smile ran across her face, and as she stepped into the aisle, the double doors adjacent to the screen moved as though fists pounded on its decaying wood. "What was that?" Charlotte said. "You scared?" Ramsey said. "I believe in science, not ghosts," Charlotte said. "Can't you believe in both?" Ramsey said. Charlotte chuckled. She walked down the aisle using her phone to light the path, dodging the upholstery in the middle of the aisle, the water dripping from the ceiling, and the old candy wrappers sticking to the floor. Ramsey followed her. She could feel him mesmerized by the high ceiling, and when she looked back his eyes were gazing at the balcony. "This was the oldest movie theater in Philadelphia," Ramsey said. "I'm surprised my mom hasn't called me back yet," Charlotte said. "She's in the hospital?" Ramsey said. "I'll pick her up tomorrow," Charlotte said. Another thud against the door. She grabbed Ramsey's hand, turned to the doors on the other side of the aisle and sprinted into the lobby. As they closed the door, the sound of keys jingling echoed from the theater balcony. Charlotte looked back, told Ramsey to be quiet, covered her mouth as the air thickened and climbed into her nostrils. But the sound didn't return. A glitch in the speakers, perhaps? Or the projector, or a mouse scurrying across the seats? Charlotte and Ramsey headed for the door to the parking lot, passing movie posters falling and covered in mold, advertising new releases by Preston Sturges, Howard Hawks, and William Wyler. A voice moaned from the second floor, a song trailing in the rancid air, and gripped her because it was the same song her mom sang as she picked her up from school, about a man going to see a galley in Kalamazoo. The sound of keys jingling accompanied the faded voice. She looked at Ramsey. He stood motionless, eyeing the banister. The words in that song, Kalamazoo zoo 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 zoo, freezing her at the door to the parking lot. "Welcome to Hess Theater," he said. "And who are you?" Charlotte said. "I am Gerald Hess," he said. "Who?" Charlotte said. "The owner of Hess Theater," Gerald said. She looked at Ramsey. She pulled at the handle of the door to the exit, coughing and remembering what the history books told her about what the owner of this theater did to himself. "You can't leave yet," he said, speaking in a way that matched the original elegance of the theater, though each word carried labored breath, and his cheekbones and jaw protruded through his skin. "We have to go," Charlotte said. "Did you enjoy your time at my theater?" Gerald said. "We did," Ramsey said. "We all enjoyed the theater," Gerald said. "For all of us in here it is our final resting place." "Who is us?" Charlotte said. Gerald laughed. "So there was a fire?" Ramsey said. "Wasn't just a fire," Gerald said. "A crook burned it down. You see, when we started out our movies offered Rizquatilda copyright content, but that changed and soon all the stars came to my theater. But still one man saw the need to burn it down with all of us here like it was punishment." Charlotte watched Ramsey, feeling the distance grow between them, his eyes regarding Gerald like a savior, each word spoken like a clue to eternal life. And Ramsey too, covered his mouth, coughing and heaving in the thick air. She pulled at the door to the parking lot. Despite no semblance of a latch or a locking mechanism, it didn't open. "You look familiar, young lady," Gerald said. "What's your name?" "Charlotte," she said. "Does Charlotte have a last name?" Gerald said. "Cook." Gerald studied her. He took a step forward. He moved his hand over her cheeks. "I'd like to show you the balcony. It offers the best seat in the house," Gerald said. "Why won't this door open?" Charlotte said. "I suspect this theater doesn't want you to leave. This beautiful and majestic place certainly has a mind of its own. And please understand, I am its caretaker, its steward if you will, and will do all that I can to protect it." She followed them up the stairs, watching Gerald, his steps unnatural and questioning, and his body odor reminding Charlotte of when she said goodbye to her grandfather, the way his breath and bones filled the hospital room with a stench that stayed with her for weeks after he died. Voices echoed from the lobby as they reached the second floor. She looked down at the balcony and saw only sewage pipes, loose electrical wire, and an empty concession stand. She didn't believe in ghosts or spirits or the Trinity. That kind of talk remained locked away for Sunday sermons and the dialogue in horror flicks and the fervent believer talk of her mother. She rubbed the temples of her head, coughing the metallic taste from her mouth. Velvet ropes guided them to the balcony. Gerald gestured them toward the torn seats. "You know, young lady, the man who burned my theater to the ground was named Cook." "Was he?" Charlotte said. "Indeed," Gerald said. "The balcony is beautiful. I can only imagine what this place looked like years ago," Ramsey said. "You don't have to," Gerald said. The doors to the theater opened. A man walked in wearing the same bomber jacket that Charlotte had seen on the movie posters, and following him a woman in a skirt suit that fell below the knees. Then 2 more women came, walking arm in arm and dressed like Liz Taylor, and behind them 2 children sprinted for the seats in the front row. "These the people you are talking about?" Ramsey said. "Who find their resting place inside this theater?" "Indeed," Gerald said. "There is no more pain and no more suffering here." Charlotte gazed at the creatures or ghosts or whatever taking their seats, their presence an offense to everything she knew and everything she'd been told, and her understanding of what lived in this world now vanished. Mom always said embrace change, but Charlotte hated that idea, felt comfort at what she knew. She watched them sitting and laughing and talking as though the universe betrayed her. A gray fedora lay on the ground, and when an old man, or whatever he was, went to pick it up, she saw bright burn marks tracing up his arm, his blood-stained eyes staring back at her. "You'll never be happier anywhere else than in this theater. We are a community bonded by tragedy," Gerald said. Perhaps we can stay for the next screening? Ramsey said. But of course, Gerald said. She leaned toward the railing, and in the flickering of the dim chandelier she saw what bonded everyone in the crowd. Their faces, their mouths, and skin deformed by flames. I know it's not the most attractive bunch in the world, Gerald said. But they did all die in a fire. They sat through the movie a second time. Ramsey said nothing, leaning forward as his eyes glossed over the screen. She watched as Gerald stared at Ramsey the way a snake stares at a bug just before it's sucked into its stomach. When the crowd stood up, Ramsey remained seated, tears dripping from his eyes. I've never been so happy in my life, Ramsey said. This theater will do that to you, Gerald said. I don't want to go home, Ramsey said. There's only one thing to do if you want to stay, Gerald said. And what is that? Ramsey said. You must do as I did, Gerald said. Jump. And all those who have passed on can visit you right here. His wide pupils stared at Charlotte, and in that moment she no longer recognized him, a man now poisoned by Gerald's word and infected by the enduring fumes infecting the air. Ramsey climbed on the ledge. He looked at Charlotte. You must come with me, he said. Maybe there's a way your mom can visit after she passes. Who knows what secrets live in this theater? And I'll be able to visit my mom as well, just like he said. Climb off that ledge, she said, standing up from her chair. And this theater is so quiet and peaceful. And think of all the movies we could watch and the stories that these people have. Oh, the stories, Charlotte, the stories. Charlotte wanted to lunge toward Ramsey, and yet she feared a sudden movement might scare him off the ledge. She knew that the pain of losing his mom had cost him his relationship with his father, and how he turned to movies to cope, and how staying here and living amongst whatever lived here might offer hope. This is why you wanted to come all along, isn't it? Charlotte said. I needed to see this for myself, Ramsey said. He stood on the ledge, a smile gleaming from his face as the crowd headed toward the lobby. She remembered when she stood at her locker last year, when she stepped out of class every hour to cry after her mom had told her the news at dinner 2 days prior, and everyone in the hallway had walked past her, except Ramsey. That day he hugged her, told her he lost his mom 6 months before, told her everything would be okay, even though he knew it wouldn't. A pamphlet lay on the ground, torn and drenched in pipe water, and it read the history of Hess Theater with a picture of Gerald holding ticket stubs in his hand and a fat smile across his face. Gerald stepped forward, and Ramsey fell back, landing in the middle of a row of seats, his back breaking like a branch, and his body trembling and shaking on the floor as blood spilled from his mouth. A smile cracked from Gerald's crusted lips. Ramsey's body trembled. Then it stopped moving at all. And you, young lady, Gerald said. Care to stay? You killed him, Charlotte said. I did no such thing, Gerald said. What the hell are you anyway? Charlotte said. Gerald leaned against the railing. He laughed. Stared at her the same way everyone in town stares at their family when they go to the store or go to church or simply leave the house. It's because of your grandfather that this happened, you know, he said. That's impossible. I know a cook when I see one. You don't know anything about me. Your grandfather thought he was doing the Lord's work by ridding the world of these movies, but all he did was murder innocent people. That's why people look at you the way they do. Charlotte turned around and headed for the exit of the balcony, and when Gerald stepped in front of her she tried to push him, but no matter how hard she pushed he didn't move, his body like hardened cement. I can't let you leave. Not after what you've seen. I told you my job is to protect the theater. Get away from me, Charlotte said. She pulled one of the stanchions, unhooked the velvet rope, and swung at Gerald. He bobbed out of the way, tripping over the steps that led to the balcony. She dropped the stanchion. She left the balcony. She sprinted down the stairs. The woman that looked like Liz Taylor and the gentleman in the bomber jacket and the children with wide smiles stood blocking the door. and as she approached the crowd the full extent of their injuries became obvious under the chandelier dangling from the ceiling. She tried to bulldoze her way through a heavy-set man with burn marks that traveled up his arms and a face so charred she could barely see the man's eyes, and she tried to crawl between the legs of a tall man with singed hair. She tried, and kept trying, and they kept pushing her back. Her phone vibrated, and when she backed away from the crowd she pulled it from her pocket. She answered, knowing that she couldn't talk long, but wanting to hear her mother's voice. The crowd encircled her, sucking up the air in the lobby. She pressed her phone into her ear, telling her mom to sing to her, "Sing that song, Mommy." Then she sang the words herself. "Am I dreamin'?" I can hear her screamin', "Hi, Mr. Jackson, everything's okay, ALAMAZO." But she heard nothing on the other line, and when she turned around she saw him, blood spilling from his mouth, his back crooked and bones bulging from his shirt. Ramsey. He followed her, chased her into the crowd, and the crowd consumed her, burnt arms covering her like flames, and they scratched at her arms and scratched at her legs, the voice of Gerald lingering in her head, telling her he could never let her leave. She wondered how Ramsey could have betrayed her like this. But it wasn't Ramsey anymore. Whatever walked in this theater, he had joined them now, and as they clawed at her, she had never felt more alone. The phone vibrated again. She recognized the number, and thought about the nights she watched TV with her mom on the couch, and the way she read to her mom on the hospital bed, and the way her mom smiled each day she picked her up from school when she was a kid. And it was in that car, on those warm leather seats, before all the bad shit happened, that she wanted to go back to. But even if she couldn't, she wanted to fight for her mom now. She pummeled the man in the bomber jacket and cursed at Ramsey, or whatever had become of him, and she kicked and flailed until they dropped her. And on the ground lay that old pipe fallen from the ceiling. She picked it up, slammed it against the glass door that led to the parking lot, and walked outside. If she hadn't been so concerned about the phone call she would have found relief in the gentle wind that swept across the parking lot, and the rumble of cars moving across the highway in the distance, and the bright stars that lit the sky. The phone rang again. She tried not to cry, tried not to think it could have happened on the day she chose not to be there. She answered. A nurse identified herself, offered her condolences, told her it had happened an hour ago, and that she had been asleep when she passed. Charlotte told the nurse she'd be on her way and soon, and then she hung up, walked her way back into the theater, trying to remember the quickest way to the balcony.
Snake in the grass. "So, is there anything you don't get?" Connie asked, resting his tattooed hands on the steering wheel of the Ford F-Series pickup. A cottonmouth snake ear, perhaps one of Connie's victims, curled around each muscled forearm with an open mouth ready to strike here on the back of each hand. A similar tattoo arose from the collar of his shirt, traversed his neck, and disappeared onto the top of his bald head. I noticed it during my induction. Connie bent down to tie his shoes, and I got a front row view of the head of a rattlesnake, venom dripping from its fangs. Nice. I'm not a big tattoo guy, but I kind of liked the honesty of Connie's decorations. He was a pest removalist, who'd covered his body with his work. A wolf spider peered from a web on his neck. Mice and rats with fleas on their backs scampered between the coils of the snakes on his forearms. I couldn't see underneath his work shirt, but there was no doubt cockroaches and ants inhabited his torso. No doubt at all. Pete. Get your head in the game. Anything you need to go over? Yeah, plenty I thought, including why a man as intimidating as my new boss could have such a gender-neutral name. No, I'm good, Connie. I got it down. Then don't look so worried, kid. Look, this ain't like that a snakes on a plane film. Nothing like that at all. You hearing me? Mrs. Blanchard is a repeat customer. She'll want to make you a cup of so-so coffee. You'll find and remove the one grass snake that's making her life hell. You'll look all professional and shit. She's a big tipper, so do a good job. You'll walk back to the office totting, said Grass Snake. I'll see you there for lunch. What could go wrong? The rhetorical question hung heavy in the air. Despite not requiring an answer, I wanted to affirm the crap out of that sucker with a high five, but the new pests cease and desist. Coveralls I'd been shoveled into prevented any movement above the waist while seated. Connie, you sure you don't have the next size up? Nah, man. Sorry, didn't expect you to be so tall. If you work out, I'll get some on order. Now hop out. I got to get over to a rat infestation. Less of course, you want to swap. I weighed a rat infestation and a one grass snake. It took no time at all. Pulling the handle on the passenger side door of the Ford, I clambered out and stood in the street. I slouched a little to close the gap. My coveralls finished well before my socks started. Grabbing my snake wrangling kit from the front seat, I shot Connie a devil-may-care smile. Like I said, kid, don't look so worried, Connie said, leaning over to pull the door closed and hitting the hammer. The tires on the Ford squealed and the truck accelerated up the street, reminding me a lot of a getaway scene in a movie. Surely, the funk of a panicked newbie wasn't that offensive? Moving as slowly as I could without appearing to be intentionally moving slowly, I walked up the path of Mrs. Blanchard's house. It was a great neighborhood, all cultivated lawns, white picket fences, and beautifully maintained, high-end houses. Feeling a little anxious, my faint hope was that the grass snake had moved on. My fainter hope was that the grass snake would be representative of the neighborhood and politely stroll into the sack for removal from the property. Had I known, I would have peeled off those nasty coveralls, and with my newfound mobility, got out of Dodge. Standing on the welcome mat with my snake wrangling kit in hand, I pressed the doorbell. A single push gave rise to an appealing peal, bells after church on a Sunday kind of thing. But the tune quickly darkened. I'm not religious or a Metallica fan, but I swear to the gods of rock, the churchyard whimsy mutated into a Enter Sandman. As expected as it was, I took a step back when the door swung open. It turned out to be a good thing, as if I hadn't, I doubt I could have taken in the glory of Mrs. Blanchard without looking twice. She was a big woman. The short-sleeved floral dress she wore highlighted the sides of beef hanging from the back of each of her arms. Her chins, of which there were many, propped up a head that could only have been stolen from Easter Island. She wasn't a tall lady, but man, she sure had some girth. Connie's claim that Mrs. Blanchard was a big tipper suddenly made sense. Hi Mrs. Blanchard. I'm Pete from Pests Cease and Desist, I said, pointing lamely at the branding on my coveralls. I'm here to remove a grass snake. Mrs. Blanchard looked over my shoulder before casting her eye over me. Where's Connie? She snapped. Rat infestation. Connie has a rat infestation? No, ma'am. He's dealing with one. If you prefer, we can wait until he's free. Mrs. Blanchard squinted, causing her eyes to sink slowly into her face, like meatballs dropped into a casserole. He's had a rat infestation before, you know, she said mysteriously, before indicating I should enter with a hand the size of a stop-go traffic paddle. I crept across the threshold, the last chimes of "They Enter Sandman" still echoing through the house. Where's the last place you saw the snake, ma'am? Backyard. Follow me, she said, walking down a hallway into the depths of the house. A false sense of security swept over me following Mrs. Blanchard through the house. I crept behind her, like a soldier taking cover behind a M1 Abrams tank, marveling at the contents of the house. Everything was 10XL size or more. Furniture, undoubtedly handmade, and all kinds of sturdy, inhabited the rooms. As we passed a bedroom, I caught a glimpse of a bed of wondrous proportions. It was large enough for Goldilocks to have found a space that was just right without moving cots. Entering the kitchen, Mrs. Blanchard motioned me towards the back door. He's out there. How do you take your coffee? As it comes, Mom, I said, bravely ignoring Connie's warning about the coffee. Stepping out into the backyard, snake hook in hand, wishing my coveralls were actually covering all, I cast about for the grass snake. After exhausting all possible hidey holes I could spy from the back step, I took a breath and ventured into the wilds of Mrs. Blanchard's backyard. And it was wild. The garden wouldn't have been out of place in an Amazonian rainforest. All it was missing was the beat of a drum announcing my presence. Instead, the air was thick with the trill of insects, a grass snake's delight. Mindful of the inch of flesh between the top of my socks and the bottom of my coveralls, I crouched and crept forward, my snake hook at the ready. Following a path of mowed grass, the only vegetation that wasn't as high as an elephant's eye, I found myself amongst a field of sunflowers. All of the flowers were mature, so faced east, not at all interested in following the sun, which was sailing towards the top of the sky. Holding my breath, I parted the sunflowers and searched for my prey. As if commanded, the insects stopped trilling. While no drums were beaten, it was a clear message I shouldn't have ignored. You should really use say the Sasa snake tongue. The hook's SIS only for experienced Sasa snake wranglers, and you aren't that. Startled, I stood, confused as to how Mrs. Blanchard could have possibly crept up on me. Turning, I expected to see her with a steaming cup of bad coffee in a balled fist, the other hand on her mountainous hips. A snicker from the depth of the sunflowers told me it was not Mrs. Blanchard. Who are you? Show yourself, I said, taking a step back. It's SIS just me. Don't worry. I'm quite harmless SIS. A green grass snake slithered from the sunflowers. Behind its head, there was a collar of white. Its eyes were bright and brown. Its voice, well, there ain't no words to describe a snake's voice 'cause there's no such thing. The best I can come up with is a persuasive tone and an overwhelming emphasis on the letter AS. Connie told me you were coming, the snake hissed. I juggled the snake hook in my hands, undecided on a course of action. If it's any Sasa solace, Connie was the Sasa same the first SIST time we met, the snake claimed, sliding gracefully towards the bare skin between coverall and sock. It's SIS okay. I don't bite. I said, taking another step back. The snake stopped in mid-slither. I'm Sasa sorry. I'm making you feel uncomfortable. I Sasa should have said, I can't bite. Allow me to assure you of that. Come closer Sasa. Many people find my voice quite Sasa soothing. My name's Sasa Simon. As in Sasa Simon Sasa says SIS. Do you know that game? Sure. I played it as a kid. I played it with Connie years SIS ago, Simon explained, rearing up. He was called by Mrs. S. Blanchard to remove a Sasa snake from this wonderful jungle. That Sasa snake was me, quite the Sasa snake in the grass SIS. We played Sasa Simon Sasa says SIS, and I talked him out of removing me. Sasa such a good man. Don't you Jews SIST love those tattoos SIS? I think I'll give it to Mrs. S, I said, shaking my head, hoping to clear the SIS from my vocabulary. Like I said, Simon was persuasive. Okay, Pete. The alternative to playing Sasa Simon Sasa says SIS. It's another game, I Sasa snake say en ladder SIS. Do you know that game, Pete? Simon said, rearing higher as if to strike. Sasa sure Sasa Simon. Is that yes SIS to playing Sasa snake say en ladder SIS, Pete? I have my own versus Sasian. All Sasa snakes, not one ladder. If Simon possessed hands, he would have given the come out, wherever you are signal at that point of the conversation. Around me, The jungle rustled and grass snakes, numerous in number, crawled from the foliage, coiling around each other in a boiling mass of slithering sinew, blocking my path back to the house. Before you say anything you'd regret, I've watched the film A Snakes on a Plane, so I'm aware of how many snaky Samuel L. Jackson thinks to be sufficient on a plane, Simon said, tongue dancing in the air. While I have a tremendous respect for the man as an actor, his math is off. Too many snakes is due the start. Shall we play Simon say Pete? Simon's friends had found the gap between my coveralls and socks. I froze as they crawled up my legs under my coveralls, bypassed my tighty whities, and wrapped themselves around my chest and neck. Yes, I said. Let's play. Good, Simon whispered. Simon says if you ever attend a call where a homeowner thinks there are grass snaky in their backyard, you will claim there is only one and you have removed it. I will take care of the rest street. Simon signaled again, somehow, and his friends released me. I wasn't sure how I'd got back to the house, but I got there. How's the coffee, dear Mrs. Blanchard asked, holding out a plate filled with pineapple upside-down cake. It was the only truth Connie had uttered in the short ride from the office, and he'd even scrimped on that. The coffee tasted like shit. Great, Mom. Thank you so much. I've really got to be going, though. Oh, okay. Say Connie I said hi, she replied, smiling broadly. Although it happened quickly, I was sure of what I saw. Mrs. Blanchard's tongue slipped over her lips and sampled the air, forks waving in opposite directions. I retraced my steps to the front door, no longer marveling at the contents of the house, and escaped to the street, where Connie waited in his Ford. I thought to run, but he rolled down the window, and in a persuasive tone and an overwhelming emphasis on the letter A.S. said, Simon says get in, we've got work to do. His forked tongue as lively as Mrs. Blanchard's. I climbed into the Ford and ruminated on the day. Connie was right. It wasn't like the film Snakes on a Plane at all. It was much worse than that. The best seats in the house. Should I get up? Should I say something? Eric whispered in my general direction from the seat to my left. No, I'm sure it's fine, Julia answered from my right, forever not wanting to make a fuss about anything. The credits have been over for like a broken bar 5 minutes now, the movie for like 20, so? Eric complained, not bothering to whisper anymore. The theater was pitch black all around, soundless without a movie playing, and blind without the theater screen or any lights on inside of the giant room. Just give it a minute, I'm sure somebody just fell asleep in the projection booth or something, Julia argued, never wanting to be impolite. Eric scoffed. Babe, come on. You don't gotta be nice to these people, they don't give a shit about you, so you don't have to give a shit about them, Eric said quite brashly. Eric. Julia hissed. Language. Julia covered my ears quickly. It startles me for a second, but her hands are cool against my temples and comforting. They smell of her beach night's hand lotion. I envy her whenever she gets to buy such pretty-looking and smelling things for herself. Oh, cool it, Julia, Jupiter's cool. Aren't you, Jupiter? He asks, though I can feel this is a little demeaning, him asking like I'm a dog. I giggle, because he ruffles my hair. I like it when he ruffles my hair. Though I can't see my sister or her boyfriend, I know he's smiling like a court jester, and she's rolling her eyes. My mother will kill me if I come back and my little sister's spouting cuss words like she's back from war. My sister says, don't repeat that word, Jupiter. She reminds me. I nod and say something to the effect of, mmm. It really is dark in here. I can't see anything, not even my own hand in front of me. I've never really been afraid of the dark. I think that's because I never had a reason to. And there was no one to be afraid of. There was no one else in the theater except for the three of us all the way up in the second to the top row. In the center, best seats in the house. Julia had rejoiced when we arrived there. Ugh, this is taking fucking forever. Eric whined. It echoed loudly in the empty and silent room. Eric, oh my goodness, you do not need to be so lewd, Julia started to say. But the lights flickered on for a moment, but we were plunged back into the dark just as fast. I was relieved. I liked this moment. It felt nice. Being between my big sister and her friend in this theater, just us. It makes me feel like I'm a big kid, which is all I want to be. Because being called too young all of the time at age 10 sucks. My sister got to do whatever she wanted, and drive cars, and hang out without supervision with her friends. Okay, maybe it is some kind of power outage? Said Eric aloud, still to my left. Yeah, let's just wait for someone to come in, though, okay? What? No, let's just leave. Get your candy, Jupiter. Eric argued. I could hear him start to move, the crinkle of his jacket on the leather seat. Eric, come on, let's just stay put, okay? She moved and I'm pretty sure her arm swished in across me to attempt to grab Eric. The bag of popcorn that had been in her lap, I heard it fall to the ground. If it is an emergency, someone will come and get us, she said. Julia, it's not a big deal, we'll just leave. I mean, would it be a big deal to stay, though? She said. Oh my god, babe, get your bag. We're fucking leaving. And then, I guess, he stood up. I felt the familiar swish of air as he did. Then I expected him to grab my hand or cross over and take Julia's hand and we'd try to descend the stairs in this expansion of darkness. But, something felt different in the air after that. Eric? Julia whispered in confusion. Did she feel the same thing as I did? There was no response. A knot tied itself in my stomach. I reached my arm out to where I believed he could have been standing, a broken bar, but there was nothing but air and layered shadows. Eric, this isn't funny. My sister cried out to the empty theater. There was still no response. It was cold, chilly in the theater. I was getting tired of not looking at anything. It was unnerving. I felt along the armrest until I found my sister's hand. I slid my hand into hers and said, I love you, Julie. You don't need to say that, Jupiter. Eric is just trying to scare us. He thinks it's funny, she tried to explain to me. But honestly wasn't quite convinced herself. You hear that? Huh? You fucking jerk. She screamed into the void in front of us. Again her voice shook. She let go of my hand. Something grazed the backs of my ankles. Ah! I squealed. What? What? Something touched my ankle. I said, swinging my legs up onto the seat and hugging them to my chest. Oh my god. Eric, I swear, and I heard her stand up on my right side. Before I could protest, she was already gone. The only thing I had left of her was the scent of her lotion and the popcorn on the floor. Julie? My voice cracked. Why was I even talking? I knew she wasn't there. Eric? I knew he wasn't there either. I just thought I'd try. I sank back farther into my movie theater seat, tried to meld myself into the chair, so that if there was something watching me it wouldn't take me. I covered my mouth to hide my crying. Even though I wanted to scream. There was nothing but darkness around me, nothing but shadows, and a void. Was I even in a movie theater anymore? I don't know. I can't see. I can't see. What's worse is that now I'm alone, all alone. The lights came back on. They stayed on. I was still in the movie theater. My eyes adjusted to the sudden brightness, spots everywhere. I could see. I could finally see what was around me. But there was no joy, as the theater was still empty. I was still alone. All alone.